Okay, good morning. My name is Adam Burgess. I am a sustainability strategist at Coaches Across Continents. Thanks, Jordan. I'm joined, as you can tell, by my colleague Jordan. Today we'll be discussing grant writing and joint funding. So this is obviously a very important topic. There's lots to discuss. I'm sure you all have plenty of questions, which we will allow time for at the end. But if you do have any comments, there is the chat box on the right hand side, and we will be asking for your comments at certain points during today's presentation. So thanks very much for joining us, whatever time it is there in the world. As you can see, we have a structure for today's session. I will be taking us through the first couple of pages, and then Jordan's going to take over during the middle section of the webinar. And I'll be jumping back in again for the discussion about joint funding and provide some examples about how Coaches Across Continents have worked with organisations in the past to help them and help us receive funding for our activities and programmes. So let's get some information from you guys. My first question, and I would like you to type into the chat box on the right hand side your answers to this question. How do you evaluate your ability to find funding for your organisation or projects? So this is about, do you believe that you do a good job? Does your organisation do a good job of finding funding? Are you able to run the activities and projects that you would like to run? Basically, we just want to get a feel for where you guys are in the funding process. Is it a strength of your organization? Is it a weakness of your organization? Please, I'll give you a minute. Please type in the chat box about how you feel about your ability to find funding. Thanks, Francis. So it sounds like from Francis and Vincent, you are able to raise money for a single program. So rather than looking at the organization as a whole, you look at your programs and then try and go after funding for those specific programs. Yeah, that's good. Good point. Good points, Charles, about the organization. It's really important that you have all of the right materials, and Jordan's going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about grant writing, but that is really important to have all the right registrations and material. So it's interesting to hear, yeah, Vincent, you aren't sustainable at the moment, and that's certainly something that we would like to be able to help all of our partners with, and sometimes it's related to the way that you receive funding, sometimes it's related to how you work in partnership, right? So it's important to consider those things. Yeah, John Boy, that's a common problem, I'm afraid. All non-profit organisations have that problem. Certainly, writing proposals for funding is only half of the battle. Getting the actual funding is difficult, and Jordan's going to go into this a little bit more later on, but we've been told by many funding organisations that you really need to apply at least 3 times for the same grant before becoming more recognised and having better chances of receiving that funding. So unfortunately it's just a lot of hard work. Yeah, so that's great. I mean, well, obviously it's not great, Elvis Swan, that people struggle to find funding. But this is what we want to discuss. You know, we understand it's a difficult problem, so that's all going to feed into this conversation. Why do you think you have those problems? So this is the second question on this slide. Why do you think it is an issue for your organisation to find funding to become sustainable? Is it because you don't have the expertise to write the applications? Is it because you don't have the right connections to the funding organizations? What do you think, what kind of help would you need to better find funding? Okay, Francis, yep. Combination of expertise and connections, and certainly it all interacts together. It all works together. Yep, yep. Certainly, OT. I think it's really important you don't try and enter into partnerships with groups who maybe aren't looking for the same thing as you, or maybe you don't properly complement each other, and so that can be tricky. Yep. And Swan, that's a great point in terms of our field as a whole. If we're looking at sport as a social impact tool, talking about the need for effective M&E measures is certainly something that is a challenge for everyone, and that is very important when you're talking about funding, especially the ongoing reporting of your work to the funder. If you're not able to effectively do that, then it can be tricky. And yeah, Vincent, I completely agree with that as well regarding a track record. Certainly one thing we've done with Coaches Across Continents is we've tried to create a proof of concept before actually going out and getting funding, which is good and bad. But it does mean that we have a strong program and a strong partnerships already existing, which we can then use as a basis for funding. So certainly getting that track record is important. Yeah, completely agree. Thank you very much for all your input on that. It's really important. Collaboration, John Boy. Yep, I would agree with that. Really appreciate your input on that question. I think that this all plays into what we're going to discuss, and so I definitely appreciate all of your assistance. Yep, Simba, selling an idea, and Jordan's going to talk more about messaging and how important it is to really sell your organization and really make it clear that what you're offering is unique. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. This slide is more about the bigger picture. So it's clear from your answers that funding is important. It's clear from your answers that if you were to receive more, you're not able to receive funding at the moment, and if you were to be able to receive more funding, it would be important for your organization. But the first question that I believe you need to consider before even saying, okay, before even starting the funding process is why am I doing this? Why is my organization doing this? It's the most important question. Many organizations struggle because we feel they just say we need money. I think it's very important to discuss strategically the idea of why you need that money, how it can fit in with your overall organizational strategy, and then how you can build towards a sustainable impact on your community. Right? So it's not just about we need money so we can bring on more employees. We need money so we can grow our organization. It's about thinking, how will this money actually improve the activities and the programs that we run in the community? How will this money make a big difference to our beneficiaries, and not just trying to collect money for money's sake? And that's important not only when you're thinking about the growth you're thinking about the strategy of the organization long term, but it's also important when you're thinking about the funder, because any funder who is looking at your organization is going to be more interested in the actual way you're going to be able to use the money effectively to make a difference in your community, to best use your expertise. So I think that that's very important before even considering that is thinking about strategy. And then thinking about what kind of things you want funded, whether it's existing activities or new activities? Is trying to get funding for new activities the best use of your resources or expertise? Maybe, apologies if it's a little loud. Maybe the best use of your expertise is one part, but then you maybe need to go after, you maybe need to speak to another local organisation who have expertise in that area and apply for joint funding with them, right? So do you want to stick to what your overall vision and mission is as an organisation, or do you want to try and get funding for something that's completely different that maybe you aren't the experts in? So it's very important to have those partnerships, like Oti was saying earlier. It's very important to have those partnerships that in the community, which mean that you not only are able to use your expertise but another organisation's expertise, and you're not you're not direct competition. You're growing together. You're making the best use of the experience of your organisations. Another big question in terms of why you need funding is can you sustain the activities after the funding finishes? Many times a funder will only fund for 2 years or 1 year. What is your long-term strategy to make sure this isn't just a 1 year? We've got some money, we run some stuff, and then after that, the beneficiaries don't see any long-term benefits, right? So, how can you work to a long-term strategy that the funding isn't just a short-term gain, which is extremely important, and not just looking at it from this one bit of funding is going to turn around our organisation. It's not as simple as that. And then, like we said, like I mentioned earlier, it's important that the funding is going to help the community. Many times when you're writing a grant or an application, you'll find that the budget is so tight that actually most of your focus is going to be on managing the money, reporting to the funder, making sure you're following all the guidelines of the grant or the foundation, and then you're not able to spend any time on actually doing the work that you want to do. So it's very important that when you're looking at the funding applications and when you're identifying the funding sources, which Jordan is going to talk about, you have to look into, can we actually manage this grant and benefit the community? Is that something that we have the resources to be able to realistically achieve? And then also, in how many other ways can you receive support that isn't necessarily financial? So at Coaches Across Continents, as all of you know, we are not a funding organisation. We provide resources aimed at empowering your leaders and your coaches and teachers, and really helping you to improve your activities for the community. So maybe you can look at, maybe you need some equipment, and maybe that would help what you can provide the community. So it's working out whether the funding is going to be the thing that completely changes around your organization, or whether there's other things that you can look for that actually will be just as important as the financial side. Now, of course, all of this works together. It's very easy to say that money isn't important, but we all know that at some level, funding will be important for your organization. So all of these things complement each other. So just on this slide, we want to make sure that it's clear that you have thought through this whole process even before you consider looking at applications, before you consider looking at funding. Why am I doing this? How does this help my organization and the community that I'm trying to serve? Okay, I think it's time to listen to another voice. I'm going to pass you over to Jordan now. So Jordan, you can put on your microphone now. I'm going to switch mine off, and he can talk more about funding sources. Jordan, not sure if we can hear you. I'm not sure if there was a. I know we had the same problem. I'm not sure, previously. I'm not sure if there's a. You may need to press a button on the, is there a play button in the right? No, we can't hear you at the moment, Jordan. So you could try, what I'll do is I'll try adding you again and see if that makes a difference. The old switch on, switch off, switch on. Doesn't seem to be coming through at the moment. Maybe if you try exiting the room and coming back in, Jordan, we'll try that. And if not, then I can talk through some of these things. Okay, so while Jordan's trying to get his audio set up, I'll continue with the presentation, and if he jumps back in and we get audio, then great. So now we've worked out strategically why we want to receive funding. So the next step is the types of funding sources that we can get, right? So there's many different funding sources. Some will be of use to your organization, some will not. Some you might find as a strength, and some you might find are weaknesses. So, sorry, just going to try add in Jordan again and see if it works. So we've listed.
Hello.
Wait. We found you. There we go. Okay, I'll pass it over.
Is it working? Wonderful. Morning, everyone, or afternoon. Adam, where have we got up to? Do you want me to start the slide? Apologies, I've had to go out and come in. Great, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone. Thank you for joining us. It was wonderful to see all of your comments and enthusiasm around funding. It's always a wonderful topic. And I think going on to what Adam discussed in the previous slide, I think it's really important to ask the questions to your organization, as in why you're applying for this funding and what good it's going to do for your organization and your community. So this slide is around funding sources. And what we want to do originally is to open your mind to different ways that you can fund your organization. So we're focusing today on applications and grants, but in addition to that, there are other funding sources that you can start to think about. First, and I think this is very, very important in terms of sustainability for your organization, is having a number of different revenue sources and income, because there's always an issue and always a risk in terms of funding, that if you have one source of funding, if that is a grant, or you have an individual donor, or you work with a corporate partner, what happens if that money suddenly goes? Is your organization at risk? So the more and more different revenue sources you can bring in, the more and more will help your organization be sustainable financially. So before we go into the 4 different sources for funding, first of all, I want to make you aware of restricted versus unrestricted income. Now, this is really important for your organization to understand the difference, as well as the need for both. So restricted funding is something or money that comes into your organization where you have to spend that funding or income on certain things in terms of projects, whereas unrestricted funding is money that you receive as an organization which you are free to spend where you see fit as an organization. So first of all, we have individual donors. Now, what is individual donor funding? That is, as I'm sure you're all aware, it's funding that you are receiving through individuals or through funding campaigns. and that money is typically is unrestricted funding. So money that you are receiving through donors and donations, you are free as an organization, usually speaking, to spend that money where you see fit. Now that may be to employ new staff, that may be to put the money directly into a project in your community, or it may be to use that money that you brought in as a new investment for your organization. Do you bring in new software or more equipment, or do you bring in new technology which can advance your organization forward? So individual donorship is, generally speaking, unrestricted funding which you can use where you see fit. Now, the best way to get individual donor funding, there are many, many different ways. Typically speaking, your local community is often used to get funding because you can see your organization, they can see the impact that you're having around the world, around your community, therefore they may be giving donations. In addition to that, there are websites such as crowdfunding or Just Giving page, or you may have people who run marathons for your organization or do certain challenges to fundraise money. And there are all different ways and different strategies you can use to get income through individual donors. Secondly speaking, we're going on to grants and foundations. Now, in the next two slides, we're going to focus quite heavily on foundations and grants. So I'm not going to focus too much right now on grants and foundations because we will go on to that. However, it's really important to note that typically speaking, a grant or foundation is restricted funding. So if you receive funding through a grant to run a project, all of that funding must be spent on the delivery of that project. Now, normally, typically speaking, it's 15 to 20% of the money you receive can go on to core costs such as staffing or such as buying assets like laptops. So, but typically speaking, all of the money needs to be spent on delivering that project, but we will go into that. Next, we have corporate partnerships. Now, depending on the size of your organization, corporate partnerships are easier or harder to come by, but generally speaking, corporate partnerships are where a corporate organization is giving money to your charity or your organization to do funding, and typically they would sponsor or they would get their brand associated with that project to support their organization as well. So corporate funding generally is, again, restricted funding. So if an organization or a corporate is going to give you money to deliver your project, they would want all of that money typically going into the delivery of that project. So it's less likely that you can use that money on other places in your organization. And it's also important to note that most corporate partnerships take a lot of time. So it takes a lot of time talking to the corporate, looking at the outcomes that you're trying to achieve as an organization, as well as what their organization wants to achieve in terms of cause marketing or corporate social responsibility work. And it's important to understand that those two priorities align. And once you find out they do align and you have it and the money is there and you start running the project, it also takes a lot of time to work with that corporate to track the progress in terms of giving them updates and working as a kind of account manager role with that individual from a corporate who wants to see the return on their investment. In terms of how to receive corporate funding, you can look in terms of where you're from, your community. Is there local businesses that are funding organizations to do work? Are there organizations locally to you that want to give back to their community? Or is the organizations from a corporate perspective that are trying to achieve the same goals as you, if that's within sport, if that's within health, if that's within education? So really look around you and say who's investing money or who could invest money if we position our organization in a good way, in a good light. And then could you work together in terms of a partnership? And by the way, during all of this, if you have any comments, please feel free to put them in the comment section, and we can look to address those as we go through. Finally, on this side, and also if you have any other ideas in terms of funding sources, it would be great to put them in the comment section. Now, finally, on this slide, in terms of funding sources, we have selling services to fund NGO activities. Now, this is a really creative way in terms of how you as an organization can be funded. in terms of social enterprises or other activities that you can do to receive funding. So I know Charles, who works for VAP in Kenya, who's on this webinar at the moment. His organisation, VAP, have a restaurant and a barbershop, and the money that they receive or the profits from their those kind of activities go into the charity to fund and pay for the services of VAP or the organisation. So that's a great creative way of how you can receive funding as well as support your local community. In addition to that, I know that there is a partner in Sierra Leone called Street Soccer Foundation, and Street Soccer Foundation are in partnership with a corporate security company called Quest Security, and 100% of the profits from Quest Security go into Street Soccer Foundation. Yeah, Vincent. Yeah, absolutely. So if that's prevalent to your organisation or your community, that's certainly an understanding. But ethics is really important to understand. Is the organisation ethically sound, and are they in a position to support your organisation whilst making sure that your organisation is not damaged? Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to move on. If you have any questions, thank you, Vincent. Any more questions, just add them into the comment section. So here on this slide, we're talking about grants and foundations specifically. So we're going to talk about the key principles to think about in terms of grants and foundations as you as an organisation should be thinking and considering to make sure that you can be as successful as possible for finding out or for being successful in applying for these grants and foundations. So first of all, finding options. It's really important to find as many different sources as possible for your funding or to receive funding. So if, for example, your organisation, if you're only solely looking at grants within sport, so if you think, well, we're working in sports, so we'll look to apply for funding within sport kind of grants and foundations, or can you think a little bit more holistically in terms of, well, actually we're using sport, but we're also tackling issues around health, or we're tackling issues around gender equity and female empowerment, or we're trying to tackle crime. So that would, again, open up more and more different types of grants or foundations that you could get access to. So really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve, because if you're solely looking at sport, or if you're looking about actually we're having a wider outcome on health or a wider outcome on education, that would open up to many more grants that you can look to apply for. In addition, it's really important to understand who is providing the money. Is it a government organisation providing the money? Is it a family foundation? Or could it be a registered grant giving? Now, in order to, once you understand that, you have to start thinking about, do we need to be registered? Do we need to be associated with any government department? Or do we have to put our organisation through a certain process to be recognised in order to be considered for these applications? Now, understanding processes is another really important process in terms of the certain requirements and prerequisites that your organisation must fit under in order to apply for such grant or foundation. So, for example, in certain instances, you may have to be a registered charity or have certain kinds of registrations in order for you to first go through the door to be considered for these applications. Also, it's really important to look at whether you qualify for these kind of grants or applications. So a lot of the time there may be a minimum requirement financially, or you have to qualify in terms of geographically. So really take time to look at each grant or each application that you're going through. And it may be that if you read the fine print, you have to have a income stream of $50,000 or $100,000 in order to qualify. Now, it takes a lot of time to go through and fill out these applications, so you have to make sure that you would qualify first of all, otherwise you may go through a lot of time to fill out the application, do the grant, and then it gets to the funder and they reject you automatically because you don't fit the criteria. So it's really important that you have to take time to go through and check if you do qualify for these grants and applications. Also be clear on how they want you to present yourselves in terms of if there is an application form or if it is a letter of interest. And really also look at if it's solicited or unsolicited applications. So in some instances, organisations or grant funders only, as Adam mentioned earlier, it may take 3 times for you to apply to them for funding before they even consider your organisation for funding. Or if it's no unsolicited applications, unless you're automatically or already associated with this funder, they may not accept your application because they only accept solicited applications, and that's somebody who they recognise and they've approached to put an application through. So really spend time in applying for these grants and applications thoroughly, so that you know that you're the right people and you have your outcomes that you're trying to achieve or ones which match the application that the funders are also trying to achieve. And it may take a long process to fill out the application, and it also may take 6 months to find out whether you've been successful or not. And you need to see if it's a one-stage process or if it may take longer, and it may take 6 months in order to find out if you've been successful. If it comes to a stage where you found out that you've been unsuccessful, please, very important to take the time to get feedback to understand why your application was unsuccessful, so that you can learn next time, and also I see what the organisation was looking for, and if you did not meet that criteria, you can use that knowledge to try and change. Again, if you've got any questions, comments, please add them in the comment section. Ebenezer, can't hear. Hopefully, Ebenezer, it's working. If not, please keep trying, because I know I also have trouble with EduTips sometimes, but it's normally my fault. Finally, I'm going to talk about, once you've identified the funding, once you've looked at, yes, this funding meets our needs and it's able to support what we're looking to do as an organisation, then it goes down to the process of actually writing the application. And it's really important, and it's a real skill to be able to write applications properly, so that the people who are reading it can understand what you're trying to do, as well as that they see that it's what they want to invest in. So it's a real skill, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of applications to get used to it. First of all, yeah, there is certainly, if you Google SIMBA in terms of looking at standard applications for a letter of interest, there's certainly templates out there that you could use, but also make sure that it's something unique to your organisation. So it's not just, I'm going to send the same thing as everybody else, but I'm going to make sure that it's unique to our organisation, so it stands out. First of all, in terms of writing applications, it's really important to read the question and understand what they're looking for, because a lot of the time, if you write an application and your thought process is, I'm going to tell these people all about our organisation, but you're missing the question and you're missing what they're trying to find out, then often that may be a problem. So really read the questions when you're going through an application, so that you're giving the funder information that they're looking for. In almost every application or grant, there's a guidance document, and it may be a long document, but it's really important to read through, because every grant or funder wants people to be successful. They don't want anybody to fail. So they provide these guidance documents to really help you give the best application possible. So really read through, so that you know what they're looking for, and you're able to provide them with the evidence needed, that they can help you, that you can help them give what they're looking for. In addition, it's often that they require supporting documents. Now, these documents may be your memorandums of understanding, it may be your annual accounts, it may be some kind of board meetings and paper documents. Now, it's important that you have those documents ready and at hand, because without them, your application will not be considered. So it's important to, if you have an accountant or a finance person, to speak to them to make sure that you know and you have all of the documents at hand, so that it becomes a lot easier to complete these forms and applications, because sometimes if you don't have those documents, it makes it very, very difficult to go through. As mentioned in the previous slide, do you need to register on certain websites to be considered? So I know in a lot of countries there are certain charity websites or non-profit websites which you need to be a part of. Certainly in Europe, if you're applying for European Union funding, there's this long process to go through to get your organisation registered. So is that the sake in your country in terms of, do you need to register in a certain place to be considered for these applications? Differentiation and messaging. So it's very important for you to sell your organization and sell your project that you're trying to do in a certain way which is which people who are looking at it can understand. So one thing that we do at Coaches Across Continents is we try and use some kind of framework that is able to people to compare different organizations and what we do. And what we use are the Sustainable Development Goals through the the United Nations. So we always try and align our outcomes to the United Nations development goals, so that the organization or the grant can look at it and understand where we're supporting, if that is the goal in terms of education or reduced inequalities, or tackling violence, for example. So we're looking and we're associating our outcomes with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, so that they can see and they can understand where our organisation fits into the bigger picture. It's also really important to understand the budget requirements and really do a thorough budget for these grants or applications, because it could be an instance where if you apply for funding and you apply for $50,000, for example, and you've been successful, but if you've made an error in budgeting and actually the project that you need to run costs $60,000, then you may actually end up being worse off as an organization if you need to pay $10,000 to ensure this project happens, because you've under budgeted or you haven't budgeted correctly in the first instance. So it's really important for you as an organization to budget correctly, so that you're meeting the requirements to give you the funds to be able to run the project successfully, but not risk under budgeting, so that you may be in more of a damaging effect through this grant than maybe if you didn't even apply in the first place. So it's really important to get the budgeting correct. And as mentioned before, typically that's 15 to 20% goes into core, paying for staff time or other core costs, and the rest needs to be spent on the budget. So it's really important to budget correctly. Finally, for this slide is a proof of concept, which Adam mentioned earlier. So is what you're applying to do, is it something totally new? And if it is something that's totally new that you're trying, how will you know, or how do you know that it's going to work and it's going to be successful? So providing a proof of concept for a new project is very important, so funders can read it and understand that yes, it's something new, but through research and through proof of concepts, that you know that it's going to be successful. If it is, if you're asking funding for a current project, then it's really important to get a proof of concept as in why you need new funding. Is the project that you're running working? So do you have evidence? And we mentioned earlier, or a lot of you mentioned about monitoring and evaluation, in that do you or are you able to prove that the proof of concept or the change that you're trying to make is actually happening? And being able to show that is really important. It will mean that your application is a lot more likely to be successful. Now, before we move back on to Adam, is there any more questions that you have before moving on? Adam, I'm going to move and I'm going to pass on to you, my friend, and you can go on to joint applications with CSE.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, so that was great. That was really interesting. Just checking the audio works well. I can see a couple of questions just before we jump on. Baco, in terms of times the interest of the applicant don't match the funders. You can do as much research as possible on what the funders are potentially looking for. Many of them are very clear with their messaging. Many of them make it make obvious what they're looking for. So if you find that what you apply for they aren't interested in, then potentially it's an issue with you applying for the wrong opportunity. But we've also found that sometimes unfortunately funders aren't always, maybe they're not always clear, or maybe they aren't always sure exactly what they're looking for when they send out the proposals, the request for proposals. So sometimes, unfortunately, I'm sure you've had the experience where you've applied for something and you thought you've been perfect for it and you fit all of the requirements, but it just doesn't quite work out. Unfortunately, some of that is just out of our hands and it's just unpredictable. But it's certainly important to note, and it is important to do your own research, as much research as possible, to make sure that you're not wasting your time applying for something that isn't going to be successful at all. So, joint funding with Coaches Across Continents. John Boyle will definitely take some more questions at the end. Joint funding with Coaches Across Continents. So this is something that we would like all of our partners, we would like to be involved with all of our partners. So, as most of you on this webinar are partners of Coaches Across Continents, this should apply. We would absolutely love to work together on joint funding applications. As you can see from the slide, we've worked with over 25 different partners on joint funding applications. It's certainly something where if we see the right opportunity, then we will approach a partner of ours. So maybe we see an opportunity in Cambodia, we'll approach our Cambodian partners, or maybe we see an opportunity that's specifically about gender equality, so we'll approach our partners who we think are the strongest in gender equality and work with them on an application. So it's certainly something that we're interested in. It's not just a one-way street though. If you have an opportunity that you see, then we would absolutely love to hear it. If you see a funding application that you think your organization is perfect for, if you've done a little bit of research and you've spent a couple of hours looking for it and you think this is one we need to apply for, but we think it would be even stronger if we had Coaches Across Continents on board, then we certainly encourage you to send it over to us, because we would love to work with you on a funding application if it's the right fit for both organizations. And like you can see there, where we'd like to apply for CAC as the global partner, with the ability to consult and provide year-round support, and your organization doing your community activities on the ground, we believe we could create a pretty strong application together. So we certainly encourage you to find those and send them in, and likewise we will do the same if we see something that fits for what we believe your organization does. I'm just going to go through a few examples and we'll jump on to a couple of these questions that have come up. So this is one example. If you have seen our annual review, this is the photo from the front page, so it's a popular one. We have a partnership with an organisation called Breaking Ground in Cameroon, and we actually completed an application and it was successful with them to receive funding, where we split the funding between the two organisations. It went towards CAC running on-field training in Cameroon and some year-round services. And then Breaking Ground were able to use the funding that they received to actually run programs and activities in their community, specifically focused at gender equality through sport. And so we were lucky enough to get this funding, and it really benefited both partners in that Coaches Across Continents were able to achieve what we were hoping to achieve, which was helping Breaking Ground further with their activities, and Breaking Ground were able to receive some money to actually run those activities and be successful in the community. Apologies if you can't hear me, Quinn. As far as I'm aware, everyone else can hear, so it must be a connection issue, I believe. Another joint funding example, we have a partnership with Slum Soccer, an organisation based in India, and we also have connections with the Chevrolet Global Corporation. And so part of Chevrolet's strategy was to build small-sided pitches in specific areas all over the world, strategic areas, so it was definitely not something that we could control. They selected the area and then we simply helped by connecting them to partners. So they were focused on more emerging markets like China, India, Brazil, the US, places like that. The US isn't much of an emerging market, but so as you can see, we rather than through our connections with Chevrolet, Slum Soccer were able to have a small-sided pitch built for them in their community, which really helped them to be able to deliver more services. And they received funding to actually manage the use of the pitch over the course of 1 to 2 years. So taking bookings, having someone on site who's able to support their programs. So that, although it's not a direct funding application, it was something where through the corporate partnership connections, we were able to help one of our partners receive both a pitch and some funding. Third example, which some of you may know, another partnership that we have is with a Young Leaders course facilitated by Michael Johnson. And so many of our partners have been successful in nominating their young leaders for the course. So a young leader from their organization can, if selected, can be part of the course and travel to Michael Johnson's Performance Center in Dallas, which is actually this year's one is taking place next week. And then following the course in Dallas, they return back to their community and they're able to receive a small some of them are able to receive a small stipend to actually run a project with the support of their organization in the community. So this is benefiting the community, it's benefiting the organization because they're better able to run their projects and they're able to really empower one of the young leaders. So it's not just about funding for both of these previous ones, it's also been about pitch, field and empowerment. So you can see that actually in this picture there's a few of our partners represented during the course. So those are just a few varying examples of joint funding that Coaches Across Continents work on with community partners, and like I said, we're definitely interested in developing these ideas further with you over the course of while we're partners. So if you have ideas, send them to us, and we'll certainly do the same with you. I'm just going to go back to a few of the questions. Juneboy, I'm just reading your comment here. Provide a proof of concept. Really confused. Work with. So I mean, I think that is a big challenge. It is just working with hope. It's saying we believe we fit with this, but we are unsure how they're going to react. Yeah, to be honest, I don't have a simple answer for that. I mean, we certainly struggle with it ourselves as Coaches Across Continents. We can believe that we fit well, but sometimes it's just not. It just ends up not working out. And at the end of the day, it's just, unfortunately, it's just pushing through, really doing the best that you can, making your organization seem unique in its ability to provide what the funder is looking for, and just doing the best that you can and keep on working at it. You know, it's certainly something where, you know, there is a low success rate generally with grants and foundations, but for the ones that are successful, hopefully it will be a big benefit to your organization. So unfortunately, it's just something you've just got to keep plugging away at, and it can be very difficult, and especially if you're working in a small team. So we completely understand that, and that's why we believe that joint funding potentially with an organization like CAC could be of even greater strengthen your application and be even stronger. Yeah. So Oti, so yeah, I mean, I think that we answered that a little bit in the examples. It's certainly something where we do, through our connections, because we're a global organization, we have some connections. I'm definitely not saying we are great. We don't have many. We don't have a really strong network, and it's something that we are trying to improve on ourselves. But like I said, if we are talking to a group and they have a priority, they suggest the priority is in specific geographic regions or is on specific social topics, then we will think about who of all of our partners are and what makes the most sense to make those connections and potentially create the relationship between the community partner, CAC, and the funder. It's not there's not really a set strategy for going about doing that. It's more just if this is mentioned, then we'll discuss it further. We don't always go about it in the same way. Maybe it's something comes up, like I said, just randomly we see something that's mentioned about Kenya or something that's mentioned about Colombia, and so we will follow that lead with the community partners that we have. So unfortunately, that's not completely in our control. Vincent, in terms of the struggle of being concise and to the point, I think that's a very good and very important point, and I think everyone should note that. Too much information isn't always a good thing. It can be important to just make sure you're clear with all the highlights of your organization. What are the five bullet points that you think are really make the difference make you sound like you are a really strong organization? I'm sure you all are really strong organizations, but just thinking about that and making sure that you really highlight those points. Simba, I mean, it's very difficult in terms of what the templates, like Jordan says, you can look into the Grant Foundation in terms of what they funded, who are the organizations. I think that every request for funding is different. I would suggest having some sort of template letter of interest, because that's generally a 2 or 3 page letter of interest where you explain the highlights of your organization and what the kind of things you could propose to do with this funder. But in terms of applications, like online application forms, they're very different. They generally ask things like objectives of the proposal, M&E for the proposal, activities that you will run, budget. There are some set things, but everyone will have slightly different questions. And get in touch with us after the webinar as well, because we will see if we can help you out and sit and show some templates. We might have some older examples. I'm not saying that they were definitely successful, but we might have some examples you could use. And then in terms of Simba for joint funding with CAC, just quickly, and then we'll finish up. So we focus on our actual community partners. We have about 90 different community partners. Many of you work with them. Many of you on this webinar work with them. So we prioritize them when we're looking for joint funding. So as long as you are part of an organization that is a partner of Coaches Across Continents, then we would certainly encourage you to. We would certainly be interested in joint funding. And then once you're a partner, the procedure generally is, like I mentioned, it's if we see something that's a good fit for your organization, if we see a funding opportunity as a good fit, then we will potentially make that introduction and send it across to you and then work on it with you. And in the same way, if you see something, if you do research and you find something that you think is a good fit for your organization and would like to apply with CAC, because CAC is a US and UK registered organization, so we can open up opportunities for you there, then we really encourage you to get in touch, send it across to us. We'll send you our thoughts, we'll potentially work on it together if we think it's a good fit. So there's a couple of different ways in terms of procedure. Okay, I think we've gone on long enough, so we're going to end it there. But if you have any follow-up questions, then please email Adam at coachesacrosscontinents.org or Jordan at coachesacrosscontinents.org. And we will certainly get back to you, because like I say, we're always interested in looking for new opportunities to work together on joint funding. So really appreciate you guys taking the time today to join this webinar. Very important topic. So we understand that you want to get this right. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will be back again. Coaches Across the Continent will be back again, I'm sure, in the next month or so. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.